The howling wind carried ice crystals that stung like needles against Martha Wilson's weathered face. Standing on a small ridge, she watched the last wagon disappear into the swirling whiteness, its canvas top fading like a ghost into the Montana. Winter, 6 wagons had left her behind, trails of churned snow marking their escape from the early blizzard. No one looked back, no lanterns swung in farewell. They were simply gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. Ain't right, she whispered, her words stolen by the wind. Martha's fingers, red and cracked from cold, clutched the frayed wool shawl around her shoulders. At 68, she'd buried a husband, 2 sons, and outlived more hardship than most. But being abandoned here, miles from any settlement with winter closing in fast, this was a new kind of betrayal. They ain't coming back, are they? Thomas stood beside her, his 16-year-old frame already tall enough to block some of the wind. His father's hunting knife hung at his belt, and his eyes, dark and hard like river stones, glared at the vanishing wagon tracks. No, Martha said simply. They're not. Behind them, Lucy sat perched on their single trunk of belongings, her small fingers working the carved wooden bird her father had given her before the fever took him last spring. At 12, she was too quiet for a child her age, watching everything. With those knowing eyes, she hadn't cried when Jeremiah Cooper, the wagon train leader, had announced they couldn't wait for Martha's lame horse to heal. "We're losing daylight," Cooper had said that morning, not meeting Martha's eyes. "Storm's coming in faster than expected. You're slowing us down. We'll send help when we reach Fort Benton." Martha knew no help would come. Now, as the last traces of the wagons vanished completely, Martha turned to face her grandchildren. "We need shelter before nightfall." Thomas kicked at the snow. "We should have never joined their train. I told Pa—" He stopped, the mention of his father still a raw wound. "We move forward," Martha said, straightening her spine despite the pain in her joints. "We find wood for a fire, something to eat, and a place out of this wind. No use wasting a breath on what's past." Lucy slipped off the trunk and moved to the old draft horse that had been the cause of their abandonment. Sadie's front leg was swollen at the knee, making her limp badly, but the horse had been with them since Illinois, and Martha had refused to leave her behind. "Can Sadie walk more, Grandma?" Lucy asked, stroking the horse's frost-flecked mane. "She'll manage," Martha said, though her voice carried less certainty than her words. "We all will." They gathered their meager belongings, a small bag of cornmeal, 2 blankets, Martha's medicine pouch from her days as a nurse in the war, a hunting knife, an old flintlock pistol with 3 shots left, and Lucy's wooden bird. Everything else had been left behind, deemed too heavy as Cooper's patience ran thin. The wind whipped harder as they moved toward a line of pine trees in the distance, seeking any break from the relentless cold. Martha led Sadie by a frayed rope, each step measured and careful through the deepening snow. Thomas walked ahead, shoulders hunched against the storm, while Lucy trailed behind, her small form nearly swallowed by her father's old coat. "Grandma," Lucy said after they'd walked in silence for nearly an hour, "are we going to die out here?" Martha didn't stop walking. "Not today," she said firmly, "and not tomorrow either if I have any say in it." By the time they reached the tree line, the light was failing fast. The forest offered some shelter from the wind, but the temperature was dropping rapidly. Thomas found a small hollow between 2 boulders, and they huddled there, using the trunk as a windbreak. "I'll get firewood," Thomas said, hand already on his knife to cut branches. "Be quick," Martha told him. "Stay where I can hear you." While he gathered wood, Martha dug into the snow with her bare hands, creating a small pit for a fire. Her fingers burned with cold, but she kept digging until she hit frozen earth. Lucy watched silently, clutching her wooden bird like a talisman. When Thomas returned with an armload of pine branches, some dry enough to burn, Martha carefully arranged them in the pit. From her pocket, she pulled a small tin of matches, one of the few luxuries she'd insisted on keeping, and struck one with trembling fingers. The flames sputtered, threatened to die, then caught on a curl of dry bark. All three leaned in, breath held, watching as the tiny flame struggled against the cold. "Come on," Martha whispered, cupping her hands around it. "Come on now." The fire grew slowly, uncertainly at first, then with more confidence. Heat, blessed heat, began to radiate outward. Lucy pressed closer, her small hands outstretched toward the flames. "Should we eat something?" Thomas asked, eyeing the small bag of cornmeal. Martha shook her head. "Not yet, we need to make it last." As darkness swallowed the forest, the first howl came, distant but clear, a long, mournful call that made Sadie's ears prick forward in alarm. "Wolves," Thomas said, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "They're far off yet," Martha replied, though she wasn't certain. "The fire will keep them away." They huddled closer together, Martha in the middle with an arm around each grandchild. The flames threw strange shadows across their faces, highlighting the hollows of Lucy's cheeks, the tense set of Thomas's jaw. Martha looked at them both and felt a familiar ache in her chest, love mixed with fear. These children had already lost so much. "Tell us a story," Lucy said suddenly, her voice small against the vast silence of the snowy forest. Martha hesitated, then began speaking softly, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "When I was a girl in Tennessee, my father taught me how to read the stars to find my way home." As she spoke, filling the dark with memories of a distant life, Martha silently counted their chances. 3 people, 1 lame horse, minimal food, and winter closing in. The nearest settlement was Fort Benton, at least 5 days' journey in good weather, in this snow, with a child and an old woman. Martha pushed the thought aside. 1 night at a time. That was all they could manage now. When Lucy finally drifted to sleep, her head heavy against Martha's shoulder, Thomas spoke in a low voice. "We should have shot Sadie," he said, not looking at his grandmother. "Used her meat to trade for a place on the wagons." "She's family," Martha replied simply. Thomas stared into the fire. "Family dies too." Martha couldn't argue with that. Instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand once, firmly. "Get some sleep, I'll watch the fire." Long after Thomas had fallen into restless slumber, Martha remained awake, feeding small branches into the flames. The wolves called again, closer now, their howls weaving between the trees like silver threads. The old woman clutched the pistol in her lap and prayed, not formal prayers from church, but desperate whispers carried away by the wind. "Just give us till morning," she murmured. "Just till morning." The dawn, when it finally came, brought no warmth, only a grey lightening of the sky above the pines. Martha's joints were stiff with cold, her back aching from sitting upright all night. She watched as the forest slowly took shape around them, dark trunks against white snow, branches heavy with ice. She woke the children gently. "Time to move," she said, "while we still have light." Thomas rose immediately, shaking off sleep like an animal. Lucy took longer, her eyes heavy, her movements sluggish with cold. Martha felt her forehead, too warm despite the freezing air. "I'm okay," the girl insisted, though her voice wavered. They ate a handful of cornmeal each, mixed with snow to form a paste. It wasn't enough, but it would have to do. Martha checked. Sadie's leg. The swelling hadn't improved, but the horse stood patiently, steam rising from her nostrils in the cold air. "Which way?" Thomas asked as they packed their few belongings. Martha pointed west, toward where the mountains rose in the distance. "There's a trading post on Shadow Creek, if my memory serves. Might be 60 miles, but it's closer than Fort Benton." Thomas looked doubtful. "If it's even still there, then we'll find something else." Martha said firmly. "We keep moving forward." They set out again, the going slower than the day before. The snow had deepened overnight, and Martha's strength was waning. She refused to show it, keeping her back straight, her eyes forward. Lucy walked beside her now, occasionally stumbling in the drifts. Thomas led Sadie, his face set in grim determination. By midday, they had reached a frozen creek, its surface glossy beneath a thin layer of snow. Martha recognized it from their journey west, Shadow Creek, named for how the tall pines cast their darkness across its waters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The trading post, if it still existed, lay somewhere downstream. "We'll follow the creek," she decided. "It's easier walking, and it'll lead us to the post." But Lucy was flagging, her steps growing more unsteady. When she stumbled for the third time, Martha called a halt. They found a fallen log beside the creek and huddled there while Martha examined her granddaughter. "I'm just tired," Lucy protested weakly, but her eyes were too bright, her cheeks flushed despite the cold. Martha pressed a hand to the girl's forehead. Fever, just as she'd feared, without medicine, without proper shelter. "We need to find help soon," she told Thomas in a low voice. He nodded, his young face solemn with understanding. "I could. Go ahead. Try to reach the trading post faster." "No," Martha cut him off. "We stay together. That's how we survive." They shared the last of their water, melted from snow in Martha's old tin cup. Lucy drank reluctantly, then closed her eyes, leaning against her grandmother's shoulder. Martha stroked her hair, her mind, racing through the herbal remedies she'd learned during the war. Willow bark for fever, but where would she find willow in this frozen landscape? Evergreen needles for tea, at least, something to keep them hydrated. "Rest a bit longer," she told Lucy. "Then we need to keep moving." Thomas paced nearby, his restless energy a stark contrast to Lucy's stillness. Martha watched him, recognizing the frustration in the set of his shoulders. He was too young to bear this weight, but life hadn't given him a choice. "Thomas," she called softly, "gather some pine needles, the fresh green ones. We'll make tea when we stop next." He nodded, grateful for the task, and moved among the trees with purpose. Martha turned her attention back to Lucy, whose breathing had grown more labored. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Just hold on." When Thomas returned with a handful of pine needles, Martha stored them carefully in her pocket. They needed to move again, to find better shelter before nightfall, but she dreaded making Lucy walk in her condition. "Can you stand, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Lucy nodded, though her legs trembled as she rose. Martha wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her small frame. Thomas took Sadie's lead again, and they continued downstream, following the frozen creek's winding path. The afternoon stretched long and bitter. The wind picked up, driving fresh snow into their faces. Lucy grew heavier against Martha's side, her steps faltering more frequently. Even Thomas's determined stride had slowed, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Martha felt her own strength ebbing. Her knees ached with each step, and her vision occasionally blurred with exhaustion. But she kept them moving, one foot in front of the other, until the light began to fail once more. They found shelter beneath, a rocky overhang near the creek, not ideal, but better than another night exposed to the elements. Thomas gathered wood again while Martha settled Lucy on their only blanket. The girl's face was flushed with fever now, her eyes glassy. "I'm going to make you some tea," Martha promised, melting snow in her cup. "It'll help with the fever." Lucy nodded weakly, clutching her wooden bird. "Grandma," she whispered, "I keep thinking I hear someone singing." Martha's heart tightened. Fever dreams were starting. They were running out of time. When Thomas returned with the firewood, Martha built another small fire, her movements economical despite her exhaustion. As soon as the water was hot enough, She steeped the pine needles and helped Lucy drink the bitter tea. The girl grimaced, but swallowed obediently. "Try to rest now," Martha told her, arranging the blanket more snugly around her small body. Thomas sat across the fire, his face gaunt in the flickering light. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked quietly. Martha met his eyes. She wouldn't lie to him. He deserved better. "I don't know," she admitted. "She needs real medicine, proper shelter." Thomas looked away, his jaw tight. "I should have made Cooper take us with them." "With what?" Martha asked. "Your knife against 6 men with rifles? You'd be dead, and we'd still be here." "At least I'd have done something." Martha reached across the fire and gripped his wrist. "You are doing something. You're keeping us alive right now." Their meager dinner that night was pine needle tea and the last handful of cornmeal. Martha gave her portion to the children, ignoring her own gnawing hunger. As darkness settled around them, the wolves began to howl again, their voices rising and falling across the frozen landscape. Lucy stirred restlessly in her fever dreams, occasionally mumbling words Martha couldn't understand. Thomas sat with his back against the rock wall, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond their small fire. Martha divided her attention between them, fear and exhaustion battling for dominance. "Someone's out there," Thomas said suddenly, his body tensing. Martha strained her eyes, peering into the night. At first she saw nothing, just shadows and falling snow. Then a movement, something darker than the darkness, shifting among the trees. "Wolf?" she whispered, reaching for the pistol. Thomas shook his head slowly. "Too tall." Martha's heart pounded in her chest. Not wolves, then. Perhaps men from the wagon train come back for them after all. But no, Cooper wasn't the type to risk his people for 3 left behind. "Stay by the fire," she told Thomas, slowly rising to her feet despite the protest from her knees. "Watch your sister." "Grandma, no." But Martha was already moving forward, pistol clutched in her trembling hand. If someone or something was out there, she would face it on her feet, not cowering by the fire. "Who's there?" she called, her voice carrying in the still night air. "Show yourself!" For a long moment there was nothing. Then a figure stepped out from between the trees, tall and straight-backed, wrapped in layers of furs. In the faint light from their fire, Martha could make out the distinctive shape of an eagle feather adorning dark hair, the gleam of eyes watching her steadily. A man. A native man. Martha's finger tensed on the trigger, but she didn't fire. She'd seen enough bloodshed in her life to know better than to start with violence. "We mean no harm," she said, her voice clear despite her fear. "We're just trying to survive the night." The man remained still, assessing her from a safe distance. Then, slowly, he raised his empty hands, palms forward, a gesture of peace. Martha lowered the pistol slightly, but didn't put it away. "Do you understand me?" she asked. The man nodded once. "English," he said, the word accented but clear. "Some." Martha exhaled slowly. "My granddaughter is sick," she said, gesturing back toward the fire. "Fever. We need help." The man's gaze shifted past her to where Thomas stood protectively beside Lucy's huddled form. His expression remained unreadable in the shadows, but something in his posture changed slightly. "Cold comes," he said. "Death follows." Martha straightened, her spine. "Not if I can help it." For the first time, something like approval flickered in the man's eyes. He studied her face for a long moment, then made a decision, gesturing toward the trees behind him. "Come," he said simply. "My camp. Fire. Food." Martha hesitated. Following a stranger into the wilderness went against every instinct she'd developed over her long life. But staying here, with Lucy burning with fever and their supplies gone, that was certain death. How do we know we can trust you? Thomas called from behind her, voice taut with suspicion. The man looked at him, then back at Martha. You don't, he said simply. But snow comes again tonight, big storm. He pointed to Lucy. She dies here. The truth of his words hung in the air between them. Martha knew he was right. Another night exposed to the elements would likely kill Lucy, and possibly all of them. She made her decision. What's your name? She asked. Makwa, he replied. I'm Martha Wilson. That's my grandson Thomas, and my granddaughter Lucy. She paused, then added, Our horse Sadie is lame, but she's coming with us. Makwa nodded once, accepting this without argument. Come now, he said, turning back toward the trees. Storm waits for no one. Martha returned to the fire where Thomas stood with his knife drawn. We're going with him, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Help me with Lucy. We can't trust him, Thomas hissed. He could be leading us into a trap. And we'll die for certain if we stay, Martha replied, already gathering their few belongings. Sometimes survival means taking chances, Thomas. The boy looked torn, glancing between his feverish sister and the stranger waiting at the edge of the firelight. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. If he tries anything, then you'll protect us, Martha finished for him. I know. Together they bundled Lucy in the blanket. The girl was barely conscious now, murmuring incoherently as Thomas lifted her in his arms. Martha doused their fire with snow and took Sadie's lead rope. Then with a deep breath she nodded to Makwa. Lead on, she said. The Blackfoot hunter moved through the forest with silent grace, finding paths Martha's eyes couldn't see in the darkness. They followed him in single file, Makwa in front, then Thomas carrying Lucy with Martha and Sadie bringing up the rear. The snow had begun falling again, thick flakes drifting down through the pine branches. Martha's every step was an act of faith, her tired legs protesting as they climbed a gentle slope away from the creek. Her mind filled with doubts. Was she leading her grandchildren to safety or to a swifter end? But each time she glanced at Lucy's feverish face, illuminated briefly when Makwa checked on their progress, she knew they had no choice. They walked for what felt like hours, though it was likely less than one. Finally, Makwa led them into a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. A lean-to had been constructed against a rock face, its entrance covered by a hide flap. Inside, embers glowed in a small fire pit. Here, Makwa said, gesturing to the shelter, warm. Thomas hesitated, still clutching Lucy. Martha placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded. Together they ducked into the lean-to, immediately enveloped by blessed warmth after the biting cold outside. The space was small but well constructed, with pine boughs creating a soft floor and hides lining the walls to keep out drafts. Makwa followed them inside, adding wood to the embers until flames sprang up again, casting a golden glow throughout the shelter. Put her here, he said, indicating a bed of furs near the fire. Thomas gently laid Lucy down, his movements protective, his eyes never leaving Makwa. The hunter seemed to understand the boy's suspicion, keeping his distance as he reached for a skin bag hanging from one of the support poles. For fever, he explained, removing a small bundle of dried plants. Medicine. Martha watched as he crushed the plants between his fingers, then added them to a wooden cup of melted snow water. The sharp, herbal scent that rose from the mixture was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. What is it? She asked. Bark from white willow, Makwa replied, and others. Good for fire in the blood. Martha nodded. She knew willow bark, had used it herself during the war when laudanum ran scarce. May I? She asked, holding out her hand for the cup. A flicker of surprise crossed Makwa's face, but he handed it. Over. Martha sniffed the mixture, then took a small sip, testing it before giving it to Lucy. The taste was bitter but not poisonous. Satisfied, She lifted Lucy's head and helped her drink. The girl swallowed reflexively, grimacing at the taste but taking most of the medicine before sinking back into restless sleep. "Thank you," Martha said simply. Makwa acknowledged this with a slight nod, then moved to the entrance of the shelter. "I check horse," he said, ducking outside before Martha could respond. As soon as he was gone, Thomas leaned in close. "We should leave as soon as it's light," he whispered urgently. "Find the trading post ourselves." Martha shook her head. "Look at your sister, Thomas. She needs rest, medicine. We're safer here than stumbling through the snow." "But he's a man who's shown us more kindness than our own kind did." Martha cut him off. "Judge him by his actions, not your fears." Thomas fell silent, though his posture remained tense. Martha understood his caution. The boy had been raised on stories of Indian attacks, had seen the aftermath of skirmishes during their journey west. But she was older, had seen more of the world's complexities. When Makwa returned, he carried a small bundle of meat, rabbit, Martha guessed, which he placed on stones near the fire to cook. The rich smell made her empty stomach clench painfully, but she maintained her dignity, sitting straight-backed against the wall of the shelter. "Your horse rests," Makwa told her, settling on the opposite side of the fire. "Leg is bad, but she lives." "She's tough," Martha replied, "like her owner." A ghost of a smile touched Makwa's lips. In the firelight, Martha could see him clearly. For the first time, a young man, perhaps 25, with sharp features and watchful eyes. The right side of his face bore burn scars that pulled slightly at his eye and mouth, telling a story of past suffering. As the rabbit cooked, an awkward silence filled the small space. Lucy's breathing had eased somewhat, growing less labored as the medicine began to work. Thomas remained vigilant, his body positioned between his sister and their host, though his eyes occasionally strayed to the cooking meat. "Why help us?" Martha finally asked, voicing the question that had been pressing on her mind. Makwa considered this, poking at the fire with a stick. "Winter kills alone," he said after a moment. "Many winters I see whites die in snow. No knowledge of land, no respect for cold." He glanced at her. "But you fight for children, for sick horse." He shrugged. "Reminds me of my mother." Martha nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. "Is she gone?" Makwa replied simply. "Many winters now." The rabbit finished cooking, and Makwa divided it equally, passing portions to Martha and Thomas without ceremony. Martha accepted hers with quiet dignity, though her hands trembled slightly with hunger. "Eat," Makwa told them, "then sleep. Tomorrow we go to my people's winter camp." Thomas looked up sharply. "We're trying to reach the trading post on Shadow Creek." Makwa shook his head. "Trading post is gone. 3 winters now. My people's camp is 1-day walk. Food there. More medicine." Martha met Thomas's worried gaze and gave a slight nod. They had little choice but to trust this man who had already saved them from a night in the killing cold. They ate in silence, savoring every morsel of the lean meat. Afterward, exhaustion claimed them quickly. Despite his determination to stay awake, Thomas's eyes grew heavy, his head eventually dropping to his chest. Martha lasted longer, watching as Makwa added more wood to the fire, then settled against the opposite wall, his knife within reach, a gesture that spoke of mutual caution. "Sleep," he told her quietly. "I watch." Martha wanted to protest that she could take a turn at guard duty, but her body betrayed her, eyelids growing impossibly heavy. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Makwa's silhouette against the fire, solid and watchful in the dancing light. She dreamed of wolves running alongside wagon wheels, of snow that spoke with human voices, of her sons' faces fading into the white horizon. And through it all, a thread of prayer, wordless but desperate, rising like smoke into the endless Montana sky. Martha woke to the sound of voices. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was back in Tennessee, her sons arguing in the next room. Then the cold seeped into her awareness, along with the unfamiliar smell of pine smoke and leather, and reality rushed back. She was in a lean-to in the Montana wilderness, her grandchildren's lives hanging by a thread as thin as spider silk. She opened her eyes to find Makwa and Thomas speaking in low tones by the entrance of the shelter. Light filtered through the hide covering. Morning had come. Lucy still slept on the furs, her breathing steadier than the night before, though. A flush remained on her cheeks. Martha pushed herself up, every joint protesting the movement. She was too old for sleeping on the ground, no matter how many furs padded it. But she was alive. They all were. "The storm's past," Thomas was saying, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "We should get moving toward the trading post." "Told you," Makwa replied patiently. "Trading post gone, burned in fire. Nothing there now." "So you say," Thomas countered. "But how do we know you're telling the truth?" Martha cleared her throat. Both men turned to look at her, Thomas with relief, Makwa with quiet assessment. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough from sleep. "How's Lucy?" "Fever lower," Makwa said before Thomas could answer. "Medicine works, but needs more, stronger." Martha moved to her granddaughter's side and placed a palm on the girl's forehead, still warm, but not the raging heat of the night before. Lucy's eyes fluttered open at her touch. "Grandma?" she murmured. "I'm here, sweetheart." Martha smoothed the hair back from Lucy's face. "How are you feeling?" "Thirsty," the girl whispered, "and my head hurts." Martha looked up at Makwa. "Do you have water?" He nodded, reaching for a water skin hanging near the fire. As he handed it to Martha, she noticed fresh blood on the sleeve of his hunting jacket. "You're injured," she said, nodding toward the stain. Makwa glanced at his arm dismissively. "Small cut, from hunting, morning meat." He gestured toward the fire pit, where several skinned rabbits lay prepared for cooking. Thomas watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. Martha could read the distrust in the set of his jaw, the way he positioned himself between Makwa and Lucy. She understood his caution, but it wouldn't serve them now. "Thomas," she said firmly, "help Makwa with the cooking. I'll tend to Lucy." The boy hesitated, reluctance clear in every line of his body. Martha gave him a look that brooked no argument, the same look she'd used on his father when he was being stubborn. Finally, Thomas nodded tersely and moved toward the fire. While the men prepared breakfast, Martha helped Lucy drink from the water skin, then used a corner of her own shawl, dampened with melted snow, to wipe the girl's face. Lucy was alert enough to look around the shelter with curiosity. "Where are we?" she asked. "Who is that man?" "His name is Makwa," Martha explained softly. "He's Blackfoot. He found us by the creek last night and brought us to his shelter. You were very ill." Lucy's eyes widened slightly. I thought I was dreaming." She glanced toward Makwa, who was showing Thomas how to prepare the rabbits. Is he going to hurt us?" "No," Martha said firmly. "He saved us. Without him, we might not have survived the night." Lucy absorbed this, her young face serious. Then she whispered, "Thomas doesn't like him." Martha sighed. "Thomas is afraid. When people are afraid, they often mistake caution for dislike." "I'm not afraid," Lucy said, though her hand tightened around the wooden bird she still clutched. "I know you're not," Martha smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "You're my brave girl." The smell of cooking meat soon filled the small shelter. Makwa had added pine needles and some dried herbs to the rabbit, creating a savory aroma that made Martha's empty stomach clench. When the food was ready, Makwa divided it equally, giving Lucy a smaller portion suitable for her condition. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind brushing against the shelter walls. Martha savored each bite, letting the warm meat restore some of her strength. She watched as Lucy managed a few mouthfuls before tiring, and Thomas ate with reluctant appreciation, his hunger overcoming his suspicion. After they'd finished, Makwa spoke. "We leave soon. My people's camp is one day's walk. Weather clear now, but more snow comes tonight." "Your camp," Thomas repeated skeptically. "And they'll welcome strangers? White strangers?" Makwa's expression remained neutral. "Some will, some won't." He looked at Martha. "But they respect strength and wisdom." His gaze shifted to Lucy. "And they will not turn away a sick child." Martha nodded slowly. "How many in your camp?" 20 families. Winter camp smaller than summer. Many hunters. Women who know medicine better than I." He touched his burn scars briefly. "My aunt among them. She saved this face when fire came. She can help the girl." Martha made her decision. "Then we go to your camp." Thomas started to protest, but Martha silenced him with a look. "The trading post is gone, Thomas. Even if it weren't, Lucy is in no condition to travel far. We need shelter, food and medicine, all. Things Makwa says his people can provide." "And if they decide to kill us instead?" Thomas asked bluntly. Makwa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for the boy's directness. "No one will harm you while I stand beside you," he said simply. "This I promise." Martha held his gaze, reading the sincerity there. "We accept your promise," she said formally, "and offer our thanks in return." They packed quickly after that. There wasn't much to gather, just their blanket, Martha's medicine pouch, Thomas's knife, and Lucy's wooden bird. Makwa doused the fire, packed his few belongings in a hide bag, and secured the shelter as if he expected to return to it someday. Outside, the world was transformed. The storm had left behind a pristine blanket of snow, gleaming blindingly bright in the morning sun. The pines stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with white. In a different circumstance, Martha might have found it beautiful. Now she saw only the obstacles it presented, deep drifts to wade through, hidden dangers beneath the smooth surface, cold that would seep into their bones despite the sunlight. Sadie stood where Makwa had sheltered her, beneath a makeshift lean-to of pine boughs. The horse nickered softly at the sight of Martha, limping forward to nuzzle her shoulder. "Good girl," Martha murmured, stroking the animal's frost-flecked mane. "Just a little further now." Makwa examined Sadie's leg critically. "Horse walks, but slow," he concluded. "We take turns carrying the girl." Thomas immediately moved to Lucy's side. "I'll carry her first," he declared. Martha didn't argue, though. She worried about the boy's strength over a long journey. Lucy was small for her age, but Thomas wasn't fully grown himself, and the snow would make walking difficult enough without an additional burden. Makwa nodded, seeming to understand the boys need to protect his sister. "I lead," he said, "old woman next, and boy and girl behind, horse last." He looked at Martha. "Stay close, path not always clear." Martha bristled slightly at being called old woman, but she couldn't deny the accuracy of the description. She was old, her hair more grey than brown, her hands gnarled with arthritis, her breath shorter than it once had been. But she wasn't finished yet, not while her grandchildren needed her. "Lead on," she said, straightening her spine. They set out in single file, Makwa breaking trail through the deep snow. Martha followed in his footsteps, grateful for the path he created with each step. Behind her came Thomas, carrying Lucy wrapped in their blanket, and Sadie brought up the rear, her injured leg causing her to lag occasionally. The going was slow and arduous. The snow reached mid-calf in places, and the bright sun reflecting off its surface made it difficult to see clearly. Martha pulled her shawl up to shield her eyes, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other. Following Makwa's steady pace, they traveled in silence for the most part, saving their breath for the difficult journey. Occasionally, Makwa would point out something of interest. Tracks in the snow indicating deer had passed recently. A hawk circling overhead. The distant shape of what might have been a wolf watching from a ridge before melting back into the trees. By midday, they had left the dense forest behind and were traversing a series of rolling hills. The wind was stronger here, cutting through Martha's worn clothing like knives. She hunched her shoulders against it and pressed on, watching Makwa for any sign of hesitation or deception. But the Blackfoot hunter moved with purpose, his steps sure, his direction unwavering. When the sun reached its zenith, Makwa called a halt in the shelter of a rocky outcropping. Thomas gratefully lowered Lucy to a sitting position, rolling his shoulders to ease the strain. Martha checked on the girl, relieved to find her alert and less feverish than before, though clearly exhausted. "Eat," Makwa said, passing around strips of dried meat from his pack. "Not far now. We cross next ridge, follow Eagle Creek to valley, camp there." Martha accepted the meat with thanks, chewing the tough, gamey strip slowly to make it last. "Your people, will they have been warned of our coming?" Makwa nodded. "Smoke signals from hills this morning. They know Makwa brings strangers. And that won't cause problems?" Thomas asked between bites. Makwa considered this. "Chief Nighthorse will decide. He is fair man, wise." He looked at Martha. "He will see truth in your eyes." Martha wondered. What truth the chief would see? An old woman too stubborn to die? A grandmother desperate to save her family? A settler on land that once belonged solely to his people? All were true in their way. "What about the others?" Thomas pressed. "The ones who won't welcome us?" "Red Knife may object," Makwa admitted. "He lost family to white soldiers. His heart still bleeds with anger." He glanced at Lucy. "But even Red Knife would not turn away a sick child, not in winter." Martha nodded, understanding the complex dynamics they were walking into. "We'll follow your lead," she said, "and show proper respect." Their brief rest concluded, they resumed their journey. Thomas insisted on carrying Lucy again, though Martha could see the strain in his face. Pride, she knew, was keeping him from asking for help. The same pride she recognized in herself, the same pride that had gotten her family through countless hardships. The afternoon brought clearer skies, but colder temperatures. Martha's feet had gone numb inside her worn boots, and her fingers ached, despite being tucked into the folds of her shawl. She found herself watching Lucy with increasing concern. The girl's fever seemed under control for now, but exposure to this cold for too long could undo any progress. "How much further?" she finally asked Makwa during a brief pause to check on Sadie, who was struggling more with each passing hour. "Before sunset," he replied, gesturing toward a distant ridgeline. "Camp in valley beyond those hills." Martha nodded, though the distance seemed impossible through the snow-choked landscape. She patted Sadie's neck encouragingly, then moved back into position behind Makwa. As they crested a small rise, Thomas suddenly stumbled, nearly dropping Lucy. Martha turned quickly, but Makwa was faster, moving past her to steady the boy and take Lucy from his arms. "I'm fine," Thomas protested, though his face was pale with exhaustion. "I can carry her." "No shame in sharing burden," Makwa said firmly, settling Lucy's slight form in his arms. "Take old woman's arm instead. Path grows steep here." Thomas looked like he might argue further, but Martha stepped in. "He's right," she said quietly. "I could use your help, Thomas." It was a small deception. Martha was tired, but still steady. But it gave the boy a way to accept help without losing face. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas moved to her side, offering his arm with grudging acceptance. The next hour tested them all. The terrain grew more difficult as they approached the ridgeline Makwa had indicated. The snow was deeper in places, with drifts reaching to their knees, and the wind picked up, driving icy particles into their faces. Martha found herself leaning on Thomas more genuinely now, her strength flagging as the day wore on. Lucy, cradled in Makwa's arms, had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her face occasionally twitching with dreams or discomfort. Martha watched her, anxiously praying the journey wouldn't worsen her condition. They were halfway up a steep incline when Sadie faltered behind them, her injured leg finally giving out in the deep snow. The horse whinnied in distress, then sank to her knees, unable to go further. Martha turned back immediately. "Sadie!" she called, making her way to the animal's side. "Come on, girl, just a little more." Sadie's sides heaved with exertion, steam rising from her nostrils in the cold air. She tried to rise when Martha tugged on her lead rope, but her legs trembled and gave way again. Martha looked up to find Makwa watching, his expression unreadable. "She can't go on," he said simply. "Then we'll rest," Martha replied, stroking Sadie's neck. "Just for a little while." Makwa shook his head. "No time. Storm comes again tonight. Must reach camp before dark." He handed Lucy carefully to Thomas, then moved to examine the horse. After a moment, he straightened. "Two choices, leave horse or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Martha felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather settle in her chest. "No," she said firmly. "We're not leaving her, and we're certainly not killing her." Makwa's eyes met hers. "Horse suffers, leg is worse. Even if she rests, may never walk right again." "She's family," Martha said, the words coming out harsher than intended. "We've already lost too much." Thomas shifted Lucy in his arms. "Grandma," he said quietly, "maybe Makwa's right. Sadie's in pain and she's slowing us down. If another storm is coming—" "No," Martha cut him off. She turned back to Makwa. "How far to your camp from here?" He considered. "Over ridge, down, to creek, then follow water to valley. Maybe 2 hours walking." Martha made a decision. "Give me something to cut branches with. I'll make a travois for Sadie." "A what?" Thomas asked. "A travois, like a sled. The Indians use them to move their belongings." She looked at Makwa. "Your people know them, yes?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. But horse too weak to pull—" "Not for her to pull," Martha interrupted. "For us to pull her. If we can get her over this, a ridge, it will be easier going downhill to your camp." Makwa stared at her for a long moment, then surprised her with a short bark of laughter. "Stubborn old woman," he said, but there was respect in his voice. "Like my grandmother. Never surrender." He reached for the knife at his belt. "I cut branches. You rest." Martha wanted to protest that she could help, but the truth was she needed the rest. She sank down beside Sadie, continuing to stroke the horse's neck and murmur encouragements, while Makwa disappeared into a nearby stand of pines. Thomas settled Lucy on their blanket in the shelter of a boulder, then joined Martha. "This is crazy," he said in a low voice. "We're risking our lives for a horse." Martha gave him a sharp look. "This horse pulled your father's plow for 10 years. She carried your mother to the doctor when you were born. She's pulled our wagon across half the country." Her voice softened. "Some things are worth fighting for, Thomas, even when it seems foolish. Especially then." The boy fell silent, absently running his fingers through the snow. After a moment, he said, "Pa would have done the same, wouldn't he?" Martha nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Yes, he would have." Makwa returned with several long, straight pine branches and some flexible roots he dug from beneath the snow. Together, they constructed a crude travois, 2 longer branches forming the frame, with shorter ones lashed across to create a platform. It wasn't pretty, but it was sturdy enough for their purpose. Getting Sadie onto the travois proved more challenging. The horse was too weak to stand on her own, and it took all 3 of them, Martha, Thomas, and Makwa, to help her roll onto the wooden frame. She lay there, sides heaving, eyes rolling with uncertainty, but she didn't struggle. "Good girl," Martha whispered, patting her side. "Just rest now. We'll do the work. Makwa fashioned harnesses from pieces of rope in his pack, which he and Thomas slipped over their shoulders. Martha insisted on taking a position at the rear of the travois to help guide it. Lucy, still wrapped in their blanket, was settled atop. Sadie, where the horse's body heat would help keep her warm. "Ready?" Makwa asked, surveying their strange caravan. Martha nodded grimly. "Ready?" The going was even slower now. Pulling the travois through deep snow required tremendous effort, and the incline of the ridge made it doubly difficult. Martha pushed from behind, her muscles screaming in protest, while Thomas and Makwa hauled from the front, their breath coming in harsh gasps visible in the cold air. Inch by painful inch, they made their way up the ridge. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Martha could feel time slipping away from them, along with the daylight they needed to complete their journey. When they finally reached the crest of the ridge, all three collapsed in exhaustion. Sadie lay motionless on the travois, though her eyes were open and alert. Lucy had awakened during the climb and now sat up, looking around with wonder at the view that spread before them. And what a view it was! From their vantage point, they could see the valley below, a wide, sheltered basin surrounded by forested hills. A creek cut through its center, its waters mostly frozen but still visible as a dark line winding through the snow. And there, nestled along its banks, was a cluster of structures. Conical lodges, some made of hide, others of brush and branches, with smoke rising from their tops in thin blue columns against the darkening sky. "Your camp," Martha said, breathless with relief. Makwa nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "My people." The descent was easier in some ways, though they had to move carefully to keep the travois from sliding too quickly downhill. By the time they reached the valley floor, the day was fading fast, the eastern sky already darkening to indigo, while the west still blazed with the last orange light of sunset. As they approached the camp along the creek bank, Martha could see activity stirring among the lodges. Figures moved toward them, men first, some carrying weapons, followed by women and a few curious children kept at a safe distance. Makwa straightened his shoulders and called out something in his own language. A greeting, Martha assumed, or perhaps an explanation. The men responded, their voices carrying across the snow-covered ground between them. "Stay behind me," Makwa said quietly to Martha and Thomas. "Let me speak first." Martha nodded, fighting the urge to pull Lucy closer as the Blackfoot men approached. She had come too far, endured too much to falter now at the threshold of safety. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, meeting the curious and suspicious gazes of the approaching tribe with dignity, despite her exhaustion. The men from the camp formed a loose semicircle around them, their expressions guarded but not openly hostile. One stepped forward, an older man with gray, streaking his long black hair, his face deeply lined by weather and time, his bearing that of natural authority. "Chief Night Horse," Makwa said in English, inclining his head respectfully. The older man's gaze moved slowly from Makwa to Martha, then to Thomas, Lucy, and finally to Sadie, still harnessed to the travois. He spoke several sentences in his native tongue, his voice deep and measured. Makwa responded, occasionally gesturing toward Martha and the children. Martha wished she could understand the words, but she read the body language of the men. Some tense, others curious. The chief himself thoughtful and reserved. After what seemed an eternity of discussion, the chief turned to Martha and spoke in halting but clear English. "Makwa says you were abandoned by your people, left to die in snow with children." His dark eyes studied her face. "Is this true?" Martha nodded. "Yes, our wagon train left us behind when our horse went lame." She gestured to Sadie. "They thought we would slow them down with winter coming." The chief's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "And this man, your leader, He did not stay to help you. No, Martha said simply. He did not. Nighthorse was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to Lucy, who watched the proceedings with wide, fever-bright eyes. The child is sick? Yes, Martha confirmed. She has fever. Makwa gave her medicine, but she needs more care. The chief turned to a woman who had come forward to stand slightly behind him, an older woman with a strong face and hands that spoke of a lifetime of work. He said something to her, and she moved closer to examine Lucy, placing a weathered hand on the girl's forehead. After a moment, she nodded and spoke to the chief. Nighthorse turned back to Martha. My sister says the fever runs deep. She can help, but the child must come to her lodge now. Relief washed through Martha, making her knees weak. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. The chief nodded once, then spoke again to his people. Some dispersed, returning to their lodges, while others moved forward to help with Lucy and Sadie. Thomas tensed as strange hands reached for his sister, but Martha placed a restraining hand on his arm. Let them help, she murmured. This is what we came for. As the Blackfoot women gently lifted Lucy from the travois and carried her toward one of the larger lodges, Martha found herself standing face to face with Chief Nighthorse. His dark eyes seemed to look through her, measuring something she couldn't name. Your horse, he said, nodding towards Sadie. You risked much to keep it alive. Martha met his gaze steadily. Some things are worth the risk. The chief's face remained impassive, but Martha thought she detected a glimmer of approval in his eyes. Among my people, he said, we say a person's worth is measured by what they will not surrender, even in the face of death. Martha thought of all she had surrendered in her long life, her home in Tennessee, her husband to the war, her sons to disease, and the lure of the frontier. But not her grandchildren, never them, and not Sadie either, the last living link to the family they had once been. Then I hope we measure up, she said quietly. Nighthorse studied her for a moment longer, then inclined his head slightly. We will see, he replied. Winter has only just begun. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, above the valley, Martha was led toward a lodge near the center of the camp. Thomas stayed close to her side, his expression a mixture of wariness and exhaustion. Sadie was being tended to by two young men who knew more about horses than Martha had expected, and Lucy had already been taken to the healer's lodge. Martha paused at the entrance of the dwelling they'd been assigned, turning to look back at the vast, darkening landscape they had crossed. Somewhere out there, a wagon train continued west without them. Somewhere out there, a lean-to in the forest stood empty, a testament to a stranger's unexpected kindness. And here, in this valley among people who had every reason to turn them away, they had found shelter as the first flakes of a new storm began to fall. Martha didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after that. She didn't know if Lucy would recover, or if they would be allowed to stay once the worst of winter passed. But tonight, they were alive. Tonight, they had not been abandoned. And for now, that was enough. The inside of the lodge was warmer than Martha had expected. A small fire burned in a central pit, the smoke rising to escape through a hole at the peak of the conical structure. Hides lined the walls, providing insulation against the winter cold, and woven mats covered the packed earth floor. It was simple, but efficient, a dwelling designed by people who understood survival in this harsh landscape. An older woman waited inside, her silver-streaked hair braided tightly against her head. She gestured for Martha and Thomas to sit near the fire, then offered them each a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid that smelled of pine and something sweeter Martha couldn't identify. Drink, the woman said in accented English, warm blood. Thomas hesitated, eyeing the cup suspiciously, but Martha took hers with a nod of thanks. She was too exhausted to refuse hospitality, regardless of its unfamiliar form. The liquid was bitter but not unpleasant, with an herbal aftertaste that spread warmth through her chest. "I am Stone Woman," the older woman said as she settled across the fire from them. "Night Horse's sister's daughter. I speak the white man's tongue." She tilted her head slightly, studying Martha. "Makwa says you fought the snow to save your horse." Martha sipped her drink before answering. "The horse is family. We don't abandon family." Stone Woman's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Yet your own people abandoned you." "They weren't family," Martha replied, the words coming out sharper than intended. "Just travelers heading the same direction." Stone Woman seemed to accept this. "The child, your granddaughter, is with our healer now. Yellowbird is skilled. She has saved many from winter fevers." "When can we see Lucy?" Thomas asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the lodge. He had finally taken a sip of his drink, though he still held the cup as if it might contain poison. "When Yellowbird finishes her medicine songs," Stone Woman answered. "First light, perhaps. The child needs rest now, as do you both." She gestured to several buffalo robes laid out on one side of the lodge. "You sleep here tonight. Food comes soon." Martha wanted to insist on seeing Lucy immediately, but wisdom overrode maternal instinct. They were guests here, unexpected, perhaps unwelcome to some, and pushing too hard could jeopardize the tentative acceptance they'd been granted. "Thank you for your kindness," she said instead, inclining her head slightly. Stone Woman's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Not all show kindness. Some say Makwa should have left you to the wolves." She shrugged. "But Night Horse is chief. His word stands. For now, you rest here in peace." The "for now" hung between them, a reminder of their precarious position. Martha understood the unspoken message. Their welcome was conditional, dependent on factors she didn't yet fully grasp. Food arrived shortly after, a stew of dried meat and wild roots carried in by a young woman who avoided meeting their eyes. Martha and Thomas ate in silence, the hot food reviving their strength and easing the hollow ache of hunger. Stone Woman watched them with quiet curiosity, occasionally poking at the fire or adding a handful of herbs that released a pleasant aroma into the air. When they'd finished eating, exhaustion claimed them quickly. Martha's legs trembled with fatigue as she settled onto the buffalo robes. Thomas positioned himself between her and the lodge entrance, his hand near the knife at his belt, even in sleep, a guardian to the last. Martha closed her eyes, expecting to fall immediately into oblivion after the day's ordeal. Instead, her mind raced with questions and uncertainties. Was Lucy truly improving? Would Sadie survive her injuries? How long would the Blackfoot people tolerate their presence? What would happen when winter finally released its grip on the land? She must have slept eventually, because she woke to the sound of voices outside the lodge, men speaking in low, urgent tones, in a language she couldn't understand. The fire had burned down to embers, casting only the faintest glow through the darkened interior. Thomas still slept beside her, his breathing deep and regular. Martha lay still, straining to hear the conversation beyond the hide walls. One voice she recognized as Chief Night Horse's, its deep resonance distinctive even in whispers. Another sounded younger, more insistent, his words sharp with emotion. The flap of the lodge opened, admitting a blast of cold air, along with Stone Woman's silhouette. She moved to the fire, adding wood and blowing gently until flames sprang up again. Only when the fire was rekindled did she acknowledge Martha's wakefulness. "Trouble comes," she said without preamble. "Red Knife speaks against you." Martha sat up slowly, mindful not to wake Thomas. "The man Makwa mentioned? The one who lost family to white soldiers?" Stone Woman nodded. "He returns from hunting, finds strangers in camp." She stoked the fire, sending sparks upward. He speaks of disease brought by white settlers, of broken promises, of children taken. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. "We've brought no disease," she said quietly, "only a sick child who needs help." "I know this," Stone Woman replied. "Night Horse knows this, but Red Knife's pain speaks louder than reason." She looked directly at Martha. "He demands you leave at first light." "Lucy isn't strong enough to travel," Martha protested. "This," I told him. Stone Woman's expression remained impassive. "He says the child may stay until healed. You and the boy must go." Martha's spine stiffened. "I won't leave my granddaughter." "Then there will be trouble." Stone Woman sighed, suddenly looking older in the firelight. "Red Knife has followers, young men who remember raids, who have lost brothers to white men's guns and whiskey." Martha considered this, weighing their options. They could try to leave with Lucy, risking her health and their lives in the wilderness. They could attempt to stay together, potentially causing division within the tribe that had sheltered them. Or, "I need to speak with Chief Nighthorse," she decided, "and with this Red Knife." Stone Woman studied her for a long moment. "Words may not be enough." "Words are what I have," Martha replied. "That and whatever wisdom 68 years has granted me." The corner of Stone Woman's mouth twitched. "Wisdom is good, courage better." She rose to her feet. "I will tell. Nighthorse, you wish to speak. Rest until then." But rest wouldn't come again. Martha sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and planning what she would say to save her family. Eventually, Thomas stirred beside her, blinking into wakefulness with the wariness of someone accustomed to danger. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, reading her tension. Martha explained the situation in low tones, watching his expression harden as she spoke. When she finished, he reached for his knife. "We're not splitting up," he said firmly, "and we're not leaving Lucy." "No," Martha agreed, "we're not. But this requires careful words, Thomas, not threats. These people could have left us to die in the snow. Instead, they took us in, fed us, treated Lucy's fever. We owe them respect, even those who fear our presence." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he nodded reluctantly. "What's your plan?" "To speak truth," Martha said, "and to listen. Sometimes understanding is the strongest weapon we have." Dawn was still hours away when Stone Woman returned to lead them to Nighthorse's lodge. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a star-filled sky and bitter cold that made Martha's breath freeze in the air. The camp was mostly silent, though a few fires still burned and shadowy figures moved between the lodges, guards perhaps, or restless souls unable to sleep. Chief Nighthorse's dwelling was larger than the others, its hide covering decorated, with painted symbols Martha couldn't interpret. Inside, a council had gathered. The chief himself, Makwa, and 3 other men of varying ages. Among them was one whose very posture spoke of anger and grief, a man of perhaps 30, with a face scarred by smallpox and eyes that burned with barely contained rage. Red Knife. Martha and Thomas were directed to sit across the fire from Nighthorse. No one spoke as they settled themselves, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, the chief raised his hand, and the council began. Martha understood none of the words, but she read the body language, the forceful gestures of Red Knife, the measured responses of Nighthorse, the occasional interjection from Makwa or one of the other men. Several times, Red Knife pointed at Martha and Thomas, his voice rising in what could only be accusation. Eventually, Nighthorse turned to Martha. "Red Knife believes your presence brings danger to our people," he said in his halting English. "White settlers carry sickness. White soldiers follow settlers. Where white feet walk, Blackfoot blood spills." He held up a hand when Martha started to speak. I have seen this truth with my own eyes. Many winters I have watched my people die. From white man's diseases, white man's bullets, white man's whiskey. Martha nodded, acknowledging his words. Many have suffered in this land, both your people and mine. Red Knife spoke sharply when these words were translated to him, rising to his feet in anger. Nighthorse silenced him with a gesture, then turned back to Martha. Red Knife says your suffering is nothing compared to ours. His wife and daughter died of smallpox brought by traders. His brother was shot by soldiers who claimed our hunting grounds. The chief's eyes were steady, revealing nothing of his own thoughts. He says all white settlers bring death, sooner or later. Better to send you away now than wait for the danger. You will surely bring. Martha felt Thomas tense beside her, but placed a hand on his arm to keep him silent. May I speak to Red Knife directly? She asked. Nighthorse considered this, then nodded. I will translate. Martha turned to face the scarred warrior, meeting his hate-filled gaze without flinching. I understand your anger, she began, pausing to allow Nighthorse to translate. I too have lost family to violence and disease. My husband died in the white man's war against itself. One son died of fever, another in a raid by white criminals who called themselves militia. She took a breath, steadying her voice. I do not claim that my losses equal yours, or that my pain matters more. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. They cannot be measured against each other. Red Knife listened impassively, though something flickered in his eyes at the mention of her dead family. When Nighthorse finished translating, the warrior spoke briefly in response. He asks why you came west, Nighthorse relayed. If suffering follows all people, why bring more suffering to new lands? It was a fair question, one Martha had asked herself many times over the long miles from Tennessee to Montana. We came seeking life, she answered simply. The war destroyed our home. Disease took our neighbors. The land itself seemed poisoned by death. She gestured toward the lodge entrance, toward the snow-covered valley beyond. We believed we could start anew, build something that would outlast us. Is that not what all people seek? A future for their children? As Nighthorse translated, Martha saw Makwa watching her intently. The young Blackfoot hunter who had saved them from certain death now seemed to be weighing her words, measuring them against some internal standard only he understood. Red Knife responded at length, his words rapid and passionate. Nighthorse listened without interruption, then turned to Martha. He says your dreams poison our dreams. Your future steals our children's future. The white man speaks of new beginnings while burning what has stood for 1,000 winters. The chief's expression remained neutral as he translated these harsh words. He says your medicine woman treats your granddaughter while his daughter lies in the ground. Martha felt the truth in Red Knife's pain, the justification for his anger. How could she argue against such loss? What words could possibly bridge the chasm between them? Ask him, she said slowly, if his daughter's death would be honored. By the death of my granddaughter. Nighthorse's eyebrows rose slightly, but he translated the question. Red Knife stared at Martha for a long moment, then spat a single word that needed no translation. No, we seek no conflict with your people, Martha continued, encouraged by this small concession. We ask only for shelter until my granddaughter is healed and the worst of winter has passed. Then we will go, seeking no claim on your lands, telling no others of your camp's location. She met Red Knife's eyes directly. I give you my word, as a mother who has buried children, as a woman who has survived more winters than most, we will bring no harm to your people. The lodge fell silent as Nighthorse translated. Red Knife's expression remained hard, but something in his posture had changed. A barely perceptible easing of tension. He spoke again, his voice lower now, less heated. He asks what you offer in return for shelter, Nighthorse said. Words are wind, promises break like ice in spring flood. Martha considered carefully. They had little of material value, no weapons to trade, no furs or food to contribute to the tribe's stores, but they weren't without skills. "I was a healer during the white man's war," she said. "I know medicines for fever, for wounds, for childbirth pains. I can work with your medicine woman, share knowledge that might save lives." She gestured to Thomas. "My grandson is strong and learns quickly. He can help with hunting, with wood gathering, with whatever tasks need doing." Makwa spoke for the first time, addressing Nighthorse and the council in their language. Martha caught her own name and Thomas's in his speech, along with what sounded like a forceful argument in their favor. When he finished, Nighthorse nodded, thoughtfully. "Makwa says you showed courage on the trail, that you refused to abandon your horse even when it meant risking death, that the boy stood ready to defend his sister against any threat." The chief's mouth curved slightly. He says, "A woman who drags a horse through snow on a travois. She built herself, might have some skills worth knowing." Martha inclined her head in acknowledgement of Makwa's support. "I've survived because I'm stubborn," she said, "and because I've learned that different knowledge, combined, creates strength. Your people know this land in ways I never will. I know medicines your healers might find useful. Together, we might all survive this winter." Nighthorse translated this to the council. The men spoke among themselves, their voices low but no longer hostile. Even Red Knife seemed to be considering her words, rather than dismissing them outright. Finally, Nighthorse raised his hand for silence. "The council will speak further," he told Martha. "You and the boy will wait." Martha and Thomas were escorted back to Stone Woman's lodge, where they found breakfast waiting, a porridge of some unfamiliar grain sweetened with dried berries. Stone Woman herself was absent, likely attending to other duties in the camp. "What do you think they'll decide?" Thomas asked as they ate, his voice pitched low despite being alone in the lodge. Martha considered the question. "I think night. Horse favors letting us stay. Makwa as well." She frowned slightly. "Red Knife fears what we represent more than who we are. His anger is righteous, even if his judgment is clouded by grief. And if they tell us to leave?" Martha met her grandson's worried gaze. "Then we'll find another way to survive. We always have." But she prayed it wouldn't come to that. Lucy was still too weak to travel, and the winter had only begun to show its teeth. Without shelter, without food, they would be at the mercy of a wilderness that showed no mercy. The morning stretched long with waiting. Martha used the time to mend tears in her shawl with a bone needle and sinew thread she found among Stone Woman's belongings, keeping her hands busy while her mind churned with worry. Thomas paced the small lodge like a caged animal, occasionally peering outside at the camp's activities. Near midday, a young woman appeared at the lodge entrance. "Yellowbird says come," she announced in broken English. "See, girl." They followed her immediately through the camp to a lodge slightly apart from the others. Inside, they found Lucy awake and sitting up, her cheeks still flushed, but her eyes clearer than they had been in days. She was wrapped in a soft buffalo calf robe, her hair neatly combed and braided in the native style. "Grandma! Thomas!" she called when she saw them, her voice weak but animated. "Look at my hair!" Martha rushed to her side, pressing a hand to her forehead. The fever had broken. Relief washed through her so strongly she felt dizzy with it. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better," Lucy said. "Yellowbird gave me tea that tasted like dirt, but she says it killed the bad spirits in my blood." She looked up at the Blackfoot healer who stood nearby, grinding herbs with a stone mortar. "She showed me her special stones too. They have magic." Yellowbird smiled slightly at this, but said nothing, continuing her work. She was younger than Martha had expected, perhaps 30. with clever hands and knowing eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you," Martha said to her, "for saving my granddaughter." The healer nodded in acknowledgement. "Child strong," she said in accented English. "Fight hard against fever spirits." She pointed to Lucy's wooden bird, which sat on a small woven mat beside her. "Bird medicine good, strong spirit inside." Lucy beamed at this, picking up her carving. "It was Papa's last gift," she explained to Yellowbird. "He made it special for me." The women exchanged a look of understanding, one healer to another, one who recognized the power of talismans to strengthen a sick child's will to live. "When can Lucy leave the medicine lodge?" Thomas asked, kneeling beside his sister and examining her with brotherly scrutiny. "Tomorrow, maybe," Yellowbird replied. "Fever may return, must watch." She pointed to Lucy's chest. "Lungs need strength." Martha nodded her understanding. Lung fever had taken many during her years as a nurse in the war. Soldiers who seemed to be recovering suddenly drowning in their own fluids as infection deepened in their chests. "We'll watch her carefully," she promised. Their visit was cut short by the arrival of Stone Woman, who entered the lodge with an air of urgency. "Nighthorse sends for you," she told Martha. "Council has decided." Martha felt her heart constrict. The moment of truth had arrived. She kissed Lucy's forehead, promising to return soon. Then followed Stone Woman with Thomas close behind. The council lodge was more crowded now. In addition to Nighthorse, Makwa, and Red Knife, several older women had joined the gathering, including one whose elaborate beadwork and commanding presence marked her as someone of importance. The fire had been built up, and the air inside was warm and heavy with the scent of burning sage. Nighthorse motioned for Martha and Thomas to sit. When they were settled, he began to speak, his deep voice filling the lodge with formal cadence. Though Martha couldn't understand his words, she felt their weight, their significance. This was no casual announcement, but a formal declaration of the council's will. When he finished, he turned to Martha. "The council has spoken," he said. "You may stay until the moon of hunger passes, what white men call February. The old women say your healing knowledge may be useful during winter sickness time." He glanced at Red Knife, whose expression remained stoic. "But there are conditions." "Name them," Martha said. "You will share your medicine knowledge with Yellowbird. The boy will learn hunting from Makwa. You will not leave the valley without escort. You will tell no one of our winter camp when you go." Nighthorse's gaze was steady. "And you will understand that not all welcome you here. Some will avoid you. Some may speak harshly. You will accept this with dignity." Martha considered these terms. They were fair, more than fair, given the circumstances. "We accept your conditions with gratitude," she said formally, "and we will work to earn the trust you've shown us." Nighthorse nodded, satisfied. "One more thing," he added. "Red Knife has asked to speak." The scarred warrior rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on Martha. He spoke briefly, his voice controlled but intense. "He says his hate for white settlers remains," Nighthorse translated. "But his people's laws of hospitality are older than his grief. Until the agreed time, he will not speak against you." The chief paused, then added, "This is a significant concession. Red Knife is respected among the young men. His words carry weight." Martha inclined her head toward Red Knife. "Thank his wisdom in putting his people's ways before his own feelings," she said. "I hope our actions during our stay will ease some small measure of his distrust." When this was translated, Red Knife's expression didn't soften, but he gave a curt nod before leaving the lodge without further comment. The council dispersed after that, leaving Martha and Thomas with Nighthorse, Makwa, and the elder woman whose presence commanded such respect. She approached Martha now, studying her with shrewd eyes. "This is Many Blankets," Nighthorse explained. "My mother's sister. She is keeper of our winter stories, our medicines, our women's wisdom. It was her voice that turned the council in. Your favor? The old woman spoke, her hands moving expressively as she addressed Martha directly. She says she recognizes the strength in your eyes, Nighthorse translated. The kind that comes from losing everything and continuing anyway. He paused, listening as many blankets continued. She says such strength is rare, and our people need all rare things to survive the changes coming to our lands. Martha felt humbled by this assessment. Tell her I hope to learn from her wisdom during our stay, she replied, and that I'm grateful for her support. Many blankets smiled when this was translated, a genuine expression that transformed her stern features. She reached out and took Martha's weathered hands in her own, speaking a few more words before departing. What did she say? Martha asked Nighthorse. She says old women must stick together, the chief replied, a rare hint of amusement in his voice. The young know how to fight, but the old know when not to. With their fate decided, Martha and Thomas were shown to a small lodge near the edge of the camp that would be theirs during their stay. It was basic but sound, with sleeping robes, cooking implements, and a small store of firewood. Lucy would join them once Yellowbird deemed her strong enough to leave the medicine lodge. Sadie had been moved to a sheltered corral where the tribe kept their own horses. The lame draft horse stood among spotted ponies, like an oak among saplings, taller, broader, conspicuously different, much like Martha herself among the Blackfoot women. That evening, as Thomas helped gather wood with other young men from the tribe and Lucy rested in Yellowbird's care, Martha sat alone by the fire in their new dwelling. She held her meager possessions in her lap, her medicine pouch, a daguerreotype of her husband in its tarnished case, the small Bible that had traveled with her from Tennessee. So much lost, so much left behind, and yet somehow they had found a path forward when all seemed lost, not through their own strength alone, but through the unexpected kindness of strangers who had every reason to turn them away. Martha opened the Bible to a familiar passage, the words barely visible in the firelight. I have been young and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. She closed the book and held it to her chest. Outside, the winter stars blazed in a black sky, indifferent to the struggles of those gathered below. But here, in this small circle of warmth, humanity had prevailed over hatred, compassion over fear. It was enough for tonight. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own lessons in survival. But they would face them together in this unexpected sanctuary amidst the winter's grip. Days in the Blackfoot winter camp passed with the steady rhythm of survival. Martha woke each morning before dawn, kindling the fire in their small lodge before the children stirred. By the time the sun crested the eastern ridge, she would have melted snow for washing and started a pot of whatever food they had been allotted, usually a thin porridge of wild grains or dried meat softened in broth. Lucy had recovered enough to leave Yellowbird's medicine lodge after 3 days, though she still tired easily and developed a worrying cough in the evenings. The Blackfoot healer visited daily, bringing teas and poultices that slowly strengthened the girl's lungs. Thomas spent most daylight hours with Makwa, learning to track game in snow, to set deadfall traps for rabbits, to read the weather in cloud patterns. At first, he had returned to their lodge each evening tense and withdrawn, uncomfortable with the gulf between his settled upbringing and the indigenous hunter's intimate knowledge of the land. But gradually, grudging respect had blossomed into genuine admiration. Martha saw it in the way her grandson's eyes lit up when describing Makwa's ability to locate a deer trail beneath 3 feet of snow or predict the direction of wind by watching smoke rise from the camp's fires. For her part, Martha divided her time between caring for Lucy, tending to Sadie, whose leg was slowly improving, and working with Yellowbird and many blankets. The exchange of medical knowledge had begun awkwardly, neither side fully trusting the other's methods, but necessity and mutual respect soon overcame these barriers. Martha learned which local plants could reduce fever, ease pain, or stop bleeding. In return, she shared techniques for setting broken bones, stitching wounds, and preventing infection that she had developed during the war. Many Blankets was particularly interested in Martha's knowledge of childbirth complications, as the tribe had lost 2 young mothers the previous winter. Not everyone in the camp accepted the white settlers' presence. Some women turned away when Martha approached the central cooking fires. Children occasionally threw pebbles at Lucy until their mothers scolded them. Red Knife maintained his promised silence, but his cold stare followed them whenever their paths crossed. Still, there were moments of connection that transcended the divisions between them. Stone Woman taught Lucy to bead moccasins, praising the girl's nimble fingers and quick learning. An elderly hunter called Two Bears showed Thomas how to repair snowshoes with sinew and rawhide. And Makwa's younger sister, Swift Fox, often sat with Martha in the evenings, eager to learn about the world beyond the mountains. "Tell again about the big water," Swift Fox would ask, her English better than most in the camp due to time spent at a trading post in her youth. "The one with no end." "The ocean," Martha would reply, describing the vast Atlantic she had glimpsed once as a girl when her father took the family to Charleston. "Water as far as the eye can see, moving in great waves like the prairie grasses in wind, but blue as the sky above." Swift Fox would listen, entranced, her dark eyes wide with wonder. "Someday I see this ocean," she would declare. "Someday I travel far like you." Martha never had the heart to tell her that their journey west had been born of desperation, not adventure, that they had left behind graves and burned homesteads, not dreams of new horizons. Let the girl imagine a world of possibilities, not constraints. Those lessons would come soon enough. January deepened, bringing storms that howled through the valley for days at a time. During these whiteouts, the entire camp huddled in their lodges, tending small fires and conserving food stores that had to last until spring. It was during one such storm, when wind rattled the lodge poles and snow piled in drifts higher than a man's head, that Nighthorse called a council. The tribe's hunters had reported troubling signs: game growing scarcer, wolf packs moving closer to the camp, strange tracks in the snow that might belong to rogue trappers or army scouts. And their food stores, while carefully rationed, were dwindling faster than expected. Martha learned of these developments from Makwa, who stopped by their lodge after the council dispersed. Thomas was showing Lucy how to carve a small wooden horse, his hands guiding hers as they worked beside the fire. The domesticity of the scene seemed to give Makwa a pause as he ducked through the entrance, shaking snow from his fur-lined hood. "Nighthorse asks if you will join him," he said to Martha without preamble. "Council matters." Martha set aside the moccasins she was mending, her own, worn threadbare on the journey to the camp. "Is something wrong?" Makwa's expression revealed nothing, but Martha had learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture. He was concerned. "Food grows less," he said simply. "Winter grows long." Martha nodded her understanding. These were the eternal concerns of those who lived at the mercy of season and circumstance. "I'll come now," she said, reaching for her shawl. To Thomas, she added, "Keep the fire fed. I won't be long." Nighthorse's lodge was crowded with the tribe's leaders, hunters, healers, and elders whose collective wisdom guided decisions affecting everyone's survival. Martha was surprised to be invited into such a gathering, aware that her presence was unusual. The chief gestured for her to sit between Many Blankets and Yellowbird. "We face hard choices," he said, without preliminary greetings. "I would hear your thoughts." Martha glanced around the circle of serious faces, noting Red Knife among them, his scarred features set in a permanent frown. "I'm honored by your trust," she said carefully, "but I'm a guest here. These decisions belong to the Blackfoot people." Nighthorse nodded, acknowledging her respect for their autonomy. "True, but you have seen many winters, survived when others fell, and—" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "You know the white man's ways, where they go when hunger bites." Martha understood then. This wasn't just about food stores or hunting grounds. It was about the encroachment of settlers, the shifting patterns of power across the territory. "You're concerned about what happens when spring comes," she said, "when more wagons head west." Several of the elders nodded grimly. Red Knife spat into the fire, his contempt for the topic evident. "Last summer, soldiers came to Big River," Nighthorse continued, using the Blackfoot name for the Missouri. "Built fort, said all tribes must stay north of river. Those who refuse go to reservation." His mouth twisted around the foreign word. "Place where people wait to die, eating white man's moldy flour, drinking white man's poisoned whiskey." Martha had heard of the reservations, government plots where native peoples were confined, ostensibly for their protection, but primarily to clear valuable land for settlement. The reports that filtered back told of starvation, disease, and despair. "The army hasn't come this far west yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Makwa answered, "but trappers tell of soldiers mapping mountain passes, counting lodges from distance." His expression darkened. "Looking for weakness." Many Blankets spoke then, her words translated by Nighthorse. "She says when food grows scarce, the weak follow the strong, hoping for scraps. Our people have always moved with the seasons, to hunting grounds, to gathering places, to trading sites. But now, wherever we go, white settlements block the way. Fences cross ancient paths. Cattle eat grass meant for buffalo." Martha listened, understanding the terrible bind these proud people faced. Stay and starve, or move and risk confrontation with an expanding nation that saw their very existence as an obstacle to progress. "What are your options?" she asked finally. Nighthorse exchanged glances with the other leaders before answering. "Two paths lie before us. We can move north, over mountains to Canada, British lands, where some Blackfoot bands still hunt freely, or east to reservation at Fort Browning, where government promises food." His face revealed what he thought of such promises. "North means crossing high passes in deep winter," Makwa added. "Many would not survive. Children, elders." He glanced at Martha, "Your granddaughter." The implication was clear. If the tribe chose to head north, Martha's family would not be welcome to join them. The journey would be too demanding, the risks too great to accommodate outsiders who might slow their progress. "And if you go to the reservation?" Martha asked. Though she already suspected the answer, Red Knife spoke for the first time, his English halting but forceful. "We die slow instead of fast. Trade pony for plow, trade freedom for cage." He leaned forward, firelight carving deep shadows across his scarred face. "White woman knows this true. Government promises sweet like honey, but taste like ashes." Martha couldn't deny it. She had seen the broken treaties, the forced relocations, the systematic dismantling of native lifeways in her journey west. The government's idea of civilization came at the expense of everything these people valued. "There's a third option," she said slowly, aware of overstepping her role as a guest, but unwilling to stay silent. "The trading post at Fort Benton. It's far, but not as far as Canada. The American Fur Company maintains it year-round. They hire Blackfoot guides, buy furs, trade fairly by all accounts I've heard." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's not freedom as you've known it, but it's not a reservation either. You could winter near the fort, hunt when possible, trade for food when necessary." The council considered this in silence. Martha knew she was suggesting a compromise that many would find bitter, a half measure that acknowledged the reality of their shrinking world without fully surrendering to it. Nighthorse spoke with the other leaders in their language, the discussion flowing back and forth with increasing animation. Martha caught occasional glances in her direction, some thoughtful, others suspicious. Finally, Nighthorse turned to her again. "This trading post, you have been there?" Martha shook her head. "No, but it was our destination before the wagon train abandoned us. I know its reputation only." "Reputation," Redknife repeated, the word dripping with scorn. "Like government reputation? Like soldier reputation?" "Fair question," Martha acknowledged. "I can't guarantee your safety or treatment there. I can only suggest it might offer a middle path between two difficult choices." Many Blankets spoke at length, her wrinkled hands moving expressively as she addressed the council. When she finished, Nighthorse translated, "She reminds us that our ancestors faced hard winters before, times when one bad decision meant entire bands perished. They survived by adapting, by finding new paths when old ones closed." He looked at Martha. "She asks if you would guide us to this Fort Benton if Council decides to go there." Martha blinked in surprise. "Me? I've never been there myself." "But you know white ways," Makwa said. "Know how to speak to traders, to soldiers. Know which promises have weight and which are empty air." He glanced at Nighthorse, who nodded permission to continue. "If Blackfoot band arrives alone at fort, soldiers may see threat. If white woman and children travel with us, soldiers see something different." Martha understood with sudden clarity. They were asking her to serve as a buffer, a translator not just of words, but of intentions. Her presence might mean the difference between being greeted as potential trading partners or as hostile intruders. It was a responsibility she hadn't sought and wasn't sure she could fulfill. Yet she could not ignore the logic of their request, nor the fact that their fates had become intertwined the moment Makwa found them beside the frozen creek. "If the council chooses this path," she said slowly, "my family and I will travel with you. I'll do whatever I can to ensure fair treatment for your people." She met Redknife's skeptical gaze. "But I won't make promises I can't keep. The world beyond this valley is changing fast, and not always for the better." Nighthorse translated her words for those who didn't speak English. When he finished, the lodge fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. One by one, the council members looked to their chief, waiting for his decision. "We will speak more tomorrow," Nighthorse said finally. "Tonight, each must listen to their own heart, their own dreams. Medicine people will seek visions. Hunters will read signs in snow and sky." He looked at Martha. "You have given us much to consider. Now go, rest with your children. We will call when path is chosen." Martha returned to her lodge to find Thomas and Lucy already asleep, curled together beneath buffalo robes for warmth. She added wood to the dying fire, then sat beside it, watching the flames dance as she contemplated the weight of what had transpired in the council lodge. These people who had taken them in, who had saved Lucy's life and taught Thomas skills he would carry forever, now faced an existential choice. And somehow, improbably, Martha had become part of that choice, a wild card in a game with the highest possible stakes. She thought of Jeremiah Cooper and the wagon train that had abandoned them to die. How strange that their greatest misfortune had led them here, to this moment, where they might play a role in determining the fate of an entire band of people. The irony wasn't lost on her. Those who had cast them aside as burdens couldn't have imagined that they would find not just survival, but purpose among those they had been taught to fear. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having blown itself. Out during the night, Martha woke to find Makwa waiting outside their lodge, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Nighthorse asks for you," he said simply. "Council has decided. Thomas stirred at the sound of voices. "What's happening?" he asked, sitting up and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "The tribe is making plans for when food runs low," Martha explained, pulling on her worn boots. "They've been discussing whether to move north to Canada or east to a reservation. I suggested Fort Benton as a third option." Thomas frowned. "Why would they care what we think?" "Because we know things they don't," Martha said, wrapping her shawl tightly against the cold. "And because we might help them navigate what's coming." She touched his shoulder. "Stay with Lucy. I'll be back soon." The council lodge was more crowded than the night before. It seemed the entire tribe had gathered to hear the decision, with only the very young or infirm absent. Martha felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her as she entered, some curious, some hopeful, others openly hostile. Nighthorse stood at the center, his tall frame straight despite the years etched on his face. Beside him stood Red Knife and many blankets, representing the different factions within the tribe. "Our people have spoken," Nighthorse announced when Martha had taken her place in the circle. "Dreams have been shared, signs read in smoke and stars." He paused, looking around the gathered faces. "We will not divide our strength. Together, we have survived many winters. Together we will face what comes." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Unity, Martha realized, had been their primary concern, not splitting the band between those who would go north and those who would seek the reservation. "When moon grows full again," Nighthorse continued, "we will break camp, travel east to Fort Benton trading post." His eyes found Martha's. "White grandmother will go before us, speak to traders, prepare way for our coming. If path is safe, we follow. If danger waits, we turn north instead." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't asking her to accompany them as a buffer. They were asking her to go ahead, alone with her grandchildren, to assess whether the fort would receive a Blackfoot band peacefully or with suspicion and violence. She began, then stopped, unsure how to respond. The responsibility was enormous, the potential for catastrophe if she judged wrongly devastating for everyone involved. Many blankets spoke up, her words translated by a young woman standing nearby. "She says you need not decide now. 3 weeks remain before full moon. In that time, prepare your heart, your mind. If you choose not to go, we understand. Our fate is our own." Red Knife added something in Blackfoot, his tone sharp but not hostile. "He says if you go, take his warning," the translator explained. "White man speaks with forked tongue. Trust your eyes, not their words. Count guns before counting smiles." Martha nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of their advice. "I will consider carefully," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I will give you my answer before the week is out." The council dispersed after that, people returning to their daily tasks with a new sense of purpose now that a direction had been chosen. Martha remained seated by the fire, trying to order her thoughts as the lodge gradually emptied. "You afraid?" a voice observed. Martha looked up to find Swift Fox standing before her, the young woman's expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Yes," Martha admitted, "I am." Swift Fox settled beside her, smoothing her deerskin dress with practiced grace. "Good," she said simply. "Fear keeps eyes open, feet careful." She touched Martha's weathered hand briefly. "I go with you if you go. Speak both tongues, no trading ways." Martha blinked in surprise. "Your family would allow this?" Swift Fox's chin lifted slightly. "I am 19 winters, refused 2 husbands already." A flash of humor lit her dark eyes. "Family calls me stubborn as north wind, always pushing where not wanted." Despite her concerns, Martha found herself smiling. "I know something about being stubborn," she said. "It's kept me alive this long." "Then we go together," Swift Fox said with finality. "Two stubborn women finding path for others to follow." The offer transformed Martha's calculations. With Swift Fox beside them, they wouldn't be simply white settlers approaching a trading post. They would be representatives of both worlds, able to navigate the complex politics of the frontier with greater nuance. "I need to discuss this with my grandchildren," Martha said. "This journey would put them at risk too." Swift Fox nodded her understanding. "Family first," she agreed, "always." When Martha returned to their lodge, she found Thomas teaching Lucy how to play a Blackfoot children's game involving stones and a small hide pouch. They looked up expectantly as she entered. "The tribe has decided to head for Fort Benton when the moon is full," she told them, settling beside the fire. "About 3 weeks from now." "So we'll go with them?" Thomas asked. Martha hesitated. "They've asked us to go ahead, to reach the fort first and prepare the way for their arrival." She saw the confusion in their expressions and continued. "They fear how they might be received, whether the traders and soldiers will see them as threats or as potential partners." Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. "They want us to vouch for them." "Yes," Martha confirmed, "and to warn them if we sense danger." She looked at Lucy, who was listening intently despite her young age. It would mean traveling ahead of the tribe, possibly facing challenges without their protection. "But they saved us," Lucy said simply, "when the wagons left us behind. Shouldn't we help them now?" Out of the mouths of babes, Martha thought, the moral equation laid bare with childlike clarity. "It's not that simple," Thomas argued, his protective instincts flaring. "We don't owe them our lives, and we don't know what we might face between here and Fort Benton." "No," Martha agreed, "we don't, but Swift Fox has offered to travel with us. She speaks both languages and knows trading customs." Thomas considered this. "Makwa would be better," he muttered. "Makwa is needed here," Martha pointed out. "He's one of their best hunters, and food is growing scarce." She studied her grandson's face, reading the conflict there. "I haven't given them my answer yet. I wanted to discuss it with both of you first." Lucy spoke up, her voice small but determined. "I think we should help them, Grandma. They helped us when no one else would." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded Martha painfully of his father. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we need to be prepared. Supplies, weapons, a clear plan if things go wrong." His jaw set in a determined line. "And I want to learn more from Makwa before we leave. Tracking, hunting, how to navigate if we get lost." Martha felt a surge of pride in both her grandchildren, Lucy's innate sense of moral obligation and Thomas's practical approach to protecting his family. They had grown so much in the weeks since their abandonment, developing strengths she hadn't known they possessed. "I'll tell Nighthorse tomorrow that we accept," she decided, "but with conditions. We'll need proper equipment, clear directions, and a plan for communicating back to the tribe once we reach the fort." That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Martha sat alone by the fire, contemplating the journey ahead. Fort Benton lay nearly 100 miles east, through terrain she had never traversed. The winter, while waning, still held deadly power in these northern lands. And even if they reached the trading post safely, there was no guarantee of how they would be received or whether they could successfully pave the way for the Blackfoot band to follow. Yet something in her heart had settled when she made the decision. Perhaps it was the knowledge that they were repaying a debt of life itself. Perhaps it was the awareness that they were part of something larger than their own survival now, a bridge between two worlds that had far more to gain from cooperation than conflict. Or perhaps, she thought, as she watched the fire's embers glow in the darkness, it was simply that at 68 years of age, she had found purpose where she least expected it, not in safe arrival at some destination, but in the journey itself and in the lives that journey might preserve. Outside, the Montana night pressed cold and clear against the lodge walls, stars wheeling above the snowy valley in their ancient patterns. Tomorrow would bring preparations, negotiations, farewells. But tonight, in this moment of decision, Wilson felt a strange peace settle over her weary bones, the peace of one who has found her path at last. Dawn broke pale and pink over the eastern ridge as Martha secured the last bundle to the travois. 3 weeks of preparation had transformed their meager possessions into a carefully planned array of survival tools. Yellowbird had provided medicinal packets with detailed instructions for Lucy's lingering cough. Many blankets had overseen the construction of snowshoes sized for each of them. Nighthorse himself had presented Martha with a hunting knife, its bone handle worn smooth by generations of use. "My father's father carried this," he had told her, his weathered face solemn in the firelight. "It finds game when bellies are empty. It returns to those worthy of its edge." Martha had accepted the gift with proper gravity, understanding its significance went far beyond the practical value of sharp steel. Now, as the tribe gathered to witness their departure, she felt the weight of their expectations pressing upon her shoulders. Swift Fox stood beside her, dressed in layers of fur and hide, her black hair braided tightly beneath a cap of rabbit fur. The young woman's face betrayed no fear, only alert anticipation of the journey ahead. Thomas checked the pistol Nighthorse had traded him for his skilled repair of the chief's favorite pipe, an ancient weapon, but well-maintained and loaded with precious ammunition. The boy had changed during their time with the Blackfoot. He stood straighter, moved with greater confidence, watched the world with the measured gaze of one who had begun to understand its patterns. Lucy, bundled in a calf-hide coat gifted by Stone Woman, sat atop the travois, hitched to Sadie. The horse's injured leg had healed enough for light travel, though Martha knew they would need to pace themselves carefully. The girl clutched her wooden bird, her talisman against fear, as she watched the gathering crowd with solemn eyes. Makwa approached, his face painted with red ochre streaks, a hunter's blessing for those embarking on a dangerous journey. He carried something wrapped in soft hide, which he presented to Thomas with formal dignity. "For finding path when clouds hide stars," he said as Thomas unwrapped a small brass compass. "Trader gave for 6 prime beaver pelts, points always. To North Star." Thomas swallowed hard, clearly moved by the valuable gift. "I'll bring it back to you," he promised. Makwa shook his head. "Keep. Remember." The two clasped forearms in the Blackfoot manner, a gesture of respect between equals rather than the white man's handshake. Yellowbird came next, pressing small leather pouches into Martha's hands. "Medicine," she explained. "For fever. For cough. For wound that comes from metal." Her dark eyes held Martha's. "For pain that comes from heart." Martha tucked the pouches carefully into her medicine bag, now a blend of frontier knowledge and indigenous wisdom. "Thank you for saving my granddaughter," she said, the words inadequate for the debt she felt. "For teaching me." Yellowbird smiled slightly. "We learn together," she corrected. "You come back, teach more." Red Knife stood apart from the others, his scarred face impassive as he watched the preparations. When Martha met his gaze, expecting continued hostility, he surprised her by approaching. Without speaking, he handed her a small wooden token carved with symbols she didn't recognize. "Show at fort," he said gruffly, "to man called Broken Hand Mitchell. He knows Red Knife will help." Before Martha could respond, he turned and walked away, his message delivered. Nighthorse raised his hand for silence as the sun cleared the ridge. "Time comes," he announced. "Path lies open before you. 3 suns to fort if weather holds. Signs good. Sky clear." He looked at Martha with calm certainty. "We follow in 7 days. Watch for smoke signals on 3rd Hill after fort. 3 fires mean safe passage. 2 fires mean caution. 1 fire..." He didn't finish the thought. "I understand," Martha said. "We'll be waiting for you." With final embraces and murmured blessings, they set off. Martha led Sadie by the bridle, Swift Fox ranging ahead to scout the path, Thomas bringing up the rear with vigilant eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The tribe watched them go in silence, a tableau of dignity against the vast white landscape. The first day's journey followed Shadow Creek downstream, the terrain familiar from their earlier travels with Makwa. They made good time despite the snow, stopping only briefly to rest and warm themselves with pine needle tea. Lucy's spirits remained high, her excitement at the adventure overriding her physical discomfort. "Will there be other children at the fort?" she asked as they sat huddled around a small fire during their midday break. "I expect so," Martha replied, adjusting the girl's fur cap to better cover her ears. "Trading posts often have families living nearby." Swift Fox nodded. "Fort Benton has many children, mixed blood some, white some, Indian children too when tribes come to trade." She smiled at Lucy. "You make friends easy, yes? With your bird, stories and clever fingers." The girl beamed at the compliment. She had indeed shown remarkable adaptability during their time with the Blackfoot, learning their language faster than either Martha or Thomas, embracing their customs without the hesitation adults often carried. They camped that night in a sheltered hollow beneath a rocky overhang, building a small fire against the bitter cold that descended with the darkness. Martha insisted on taking the first watch despite Swift Fox's offer, wanting the younger woman, fresh for the difficult travel that lay ahead. As the others slept, Martha sat with her back against stone, night horse's knife across her knees, watching the stars wheel above the silent landscape. Her thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought them here, the decision to leave Tennessee after her last son's death, the grueling months on the trail west, the moment of abandonment that should have meant their end. How strange the patterns life wove, she reflected. Had the wagon train not left them behind, they would have reached Fort Benton months ago, anonymous settlers among many. Instead, they had found themselves embedded in a desperate drama not of their making, a people fighting for survival against forces that cared nothing for their ancient ways or their human dignity. The second day brought deeper snow and a biting wind from the north. They struggled forward, taking turns breaking trail, covering less ground than Martha had hoped. Lucy's cough worsened in the cold, a wet, worrying sound that prompted frequent stops to administer Yellowbird's medicine. By evening, exhaustion had settled into Martha's bones like an old friend. They made camp in a stand of pines, the trees providing meager shelter from the wind. As Thomas and Swift Fox gathered firewood, Martha examined Lucy's flushed face with growing concern. "Just tired, Grandma," the girl insisted, though her breathing came in shallow gasps. Swift Fox, returning with an armload of branches, paused to study Lucy's condition. Without comment, she set down the wood and disappeared back into the trees. When she returned minutes later, she carried a handful of gray-green lichen scraped from the north side of pine trunks. "Lung medicine," she explained, adding it to their small cooking pot. "Strong smell, stronger healing." Whoa, the resulting tea was bitter enough to make Lucy grimace, but she drank it obediently. By morning, her breathing had eased somewhat, though fever still brightened her eyes. "We push hard today," Swift Fox said as they broke camp. "Fort Benton. Before nightfall, if legs stay strong." Thomas glanced at his sister with doubt. "Lucy needs rest." "Lucy needs walls and warm fire," Swift Fox countered. "Medicine man at fort has white man's medicines too. Better for her lungs than cold camp another night." Martha had to agree, though the thought of forcing the pace with an ill child tore at her heart. "We'll try," she decided, "but if she worsens, we stop." The third day tested them all. The terrain grew more difficult as they left the shelter of the valley, emerging onto open plains, swept by winds that cut like knives. Swift Fox led them unerringly northeast, following landmarks only she could distinguish in the featureless, white expanse. By midday, Lucy had fallen into a feverish doze atop the travois, her small face pinched with discomfort despite the furs wrapped around her. Thomas's expression grew increasingly worried as he walked beside his sister, one hand resting on the travois as if his touch alone could protect her. "How much further?" he asked during a brief rest, his voice tight with concern. Swift Fox pointed toward a distant smudge on the horizon. "Fort Benton there, where river bends like snake. 3 hours more, maybe 4. Martha nodded, squaring her shoulders against fatigue. "Then we continue." The final approach to Fort Benton revealed itself gradually. First a wisp of smoke against the gray sky, then the dark shapes of buildings nestled beside the frozen Missouri River. As they drew closer, details emerged. A palisade wall surrounding a central compound, smaller structures scattered along the riverbank, the stars and stripes flying stiff in the wind atop a tall pole. A sense of foreboding crawled up Martha's spine as they approached the fort's gates. Their appearance, 2 women, a boy, and a sick child on a native travois, would raise questions. The answers to those questions would determine not only their own reception, but the fate of the Blackfoot band following behind them. "Let me speak first," Swift Fox murmured as they drew within hailing distance of the gate. "I know Fort ways, trading words." Martha nodded, grateful for the young woman's confidence despite her own misgivings. She adjusted her shawl, trying to present as respectable an appearance as possible after days on the trail. A guard spotted them from the watchtower, calling out a challenge that carried clearly across the snow. Swift Fox answered in English, her voice steady and clear. "Travelers. Seeking shelter!" Women and children from wagon train, plus Blackfoot guide. There was a pause, then the sound of a heavy bar being lifted. The gate swung open to reveal a bearded man in a fur coat, a rifle held casually but not threateningly in his arms. "You folks look half frozen," he observed, eyes taking in their strange party with professional assessment. "Where'd you come from in this weather?" "Blackfoot winter camp in Thunder Basin," Swift Fox answered before Martha could speak. "Children need medicine. Woman is Martha Wilson, bound for Fort Benton before snow came." The guard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Thunder Basin? That's a fair piece through rough country." His gaze lingered on Lucy's feverish face. "Child looks poorly. Better come in." They entered the fort with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The compound bustled with activity despite the winter season. Traders in buckskins, a few soldiers in blue uniforms, native women carrying bundles between buildings. It was a frontier crossroads, neither fully military nor civilian, white nor indigenous, but a blending of worlds that existed nowhere else. The guard directed them toward a low building with a sign identifying it as the trading company office. "Mitchell's inside," he said. "He'll want to hear your story." At the mention of the name, Martha remembered Red Knife's token. She clutched it in her pocket as they approached the building, hoping the scarred warrior's unexpected gift might ease their passage. Inside, they found a large room, warmed by a pot-bellied stove and lit by oil lamps against the winter gloom. Shelves laden with trade goods lined the walls. Blankets, tools, cooking pots, tobacco, and goods Martha hadn't seen since Tennessee. Behind a broad counter stood a man whose very presence commanded attention. Kenneth Broken Hand, Mitchell had earned his nickname from an old injury that left his left hand permanently clenched, but there was nothing diminished about his bearing. Tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60-odd years, with a gray-streaked beard and penetrating blue eyes, he dominated the room through sheer force of personality. "Well now," he said as they entered, his gaze sweeping over them with keen interest. "You're an unexpected sight this time of year." He focused on Swift Fox with recognition. "I know you, girl. Red Cloud's band, yes? Traded for that silver concho. Built last spring. Swift fox, she confirmed with a respectful nod. From many horses banned now. I guide these people from Blackfoot winter camp. Mitchell's attention shifted to Martha. And you, ma'am. Not typical to see white women traveling with Blackfoot guides in February. Martha stepped forward, summoning her dignity despite her travel-worn appearance. Martha Wilson, she introduced herself. These are my grandchildren, Thomas and Lucy. Our wagon train left us behind when our horse went lame. The Blackfoot people took us in when we would have died in the snow. As she spoke, she placed Red Knife's token on the counter between them. Mitchell's eyes widened slightly as he picked it up, turning it in his good hand. Red Knife gave you this? He asked, his tone suggesting he found this difficult to believe. Yes, Martha confirmed. He said to show it to you, that you would help. Mitchell studied her face for a long moment. Red Knife doesn't give his medicine tokens to white folks, he said finally. Not ever. Man lost his whole family to smallpox from a trading caravan. He looked at the token again, then back at Martha. You must have done something remarkable to earn this. My grandmother refused to let our horse die, Lucy piped up unexpectedly, her voice weak but determined. Even when everyone said we should. Leave her behind. The Blackfoot respected that. They said it showed good heart. A smile cracked through Mitchell's weathered face. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. He looked at Lucy more carefully then, noting her flushed cheeks and labored breathing. This child needs the doctor, he said, his manner shifting to decisive action. Jenkins, he called to a young clerk sorting inventory nearby. Take these folks to Doc Hawkins. Tell him it's lung fever by the look of it. As Jenkins moved to escort them, Martha placed a hand on Mitchell's arm. There's more, she said quietly. The Blackfoot band, many horses people. They're coming here in 4 days' time. Their winter hunting has failed. They need to trade for supplies. Mitchell's expression grew serious. Many horses is coming here, with his whole band. Martha nodded. They sent us ahead to prepare the way, to ensure they would be received peacefully. Understanding dawned in the trader's eyes. They're using you as a buffer, he said. Smart. Army patrols have been jumpy lately. Incident with a crow hunting party last month has everyone on edge. Will they be safe? Martha pressed. Mitchell considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Many horses has always traded fair. No trouble with his people. He glanced at the token again, and if Red Knife is with them, vouching for you, he nodded decisively. Yes, they'll be safe. I'll speak to the fort commander myself. Relief washed through Martha, leaving her lightheaded. They had done it. Crossed the wilderness, reached the fort, secured safe passage for the people who had saved them. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for what they had accomplished. No, Mrs. Wilson, Mitchell replied, genuine respect in his voice. Thank you. Not many would have undertaken such a journey for people not their own. He smiled slightly, especially not after being abandoned to die by their own kind. As Jenkins led them toward the doctor's quarters, Martha glanced back at the gates through which they had entered. Somewhere out there, Night Horse's people were preparing to break camp, to follow the path she had helped clear. They would carry their ancient ways into an uncertain future, adapting as they had always done to survive. And Martha Wilson, who had lost everything and started again more times than most could endure, had found an unexpected truth in the Montana wilderness. Family wasn't always blood. Home wasn't always a place. Sometimes it was the journey itself, and those who walked beside you when all others turned away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.